All right, welcome everybody. Here we are once again, Health Talk, another glorious Monday. It's absolutely beautiful outside. That's John King over there. Hey, John.
Hey, good morning, Peter.
And we have a lovely guest in the studio, Rebecca Robertson, occupational therapist with Community Medical Center. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well.
Let's get that up there. There we go. That's perfect. Okay, so tell us a little bit about Rebecca Robertson. How did you get to community, and how did you get to do what you do?
Well, I went to school at UNC Chapel Hill, go Tar Heels, North Carolina.
Wow.
My husband.
You're a long way from home, aren't you?
I'm a very long way from home, but
I lived in Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point.
Oh,
back and forth,
excellent.
back and
All
forth,
right.
back and
I think
forth.
I know why you were there.
Marine brat. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Test subject.
Yeah. My husband and I moved here at the end of 1988, and I started working at Community in 89. I became an OT, an occupational therapist, in 85. And it's a really good profession. You get to work a lot helping people recover from major trauma in their life, and you also get to work on the prevention side of things. So
that's probably a big deal in Montana. I know for a long time we held the record as one of the most dangerous states to work in, right?
yes, not only to work in, I think we're fourth now in the nation with automobile accidents. I know we're going to be talking about that today. We have high suicide rates. It's a pretty dangerous state overall.
Wow. So you're like at the front lines of all this stuff.
Well, definitely with folks that have been hurt.
So where are we? I mean, are we doing better? You said we're fourth in the automobile accident realm. How are we doing on the workplace safety realm?
You know, on the workplace safety, I am not sure of those statistics. The folks that I work with have sustained strokes and brain injuries and such, and a lot of the strokes, of course, are more organically caused. But
Gotcha.
I'm not sure where we are there.
Well, I know in years past we've had several conversations with the folks from the work comp,
Oh, yeah.
who come in and they talk about workplace safety and how, I don't want to say fanatical they are, but they really are. They're quite fanatical about workplace safety, and I know OSHA is also involved. There are lots of various alphabet soup organizations
Very much,
that are involved in the workplace. So
Yes.
do you integrate with them at all, or are you kind of where people come once they've had an accident?
You know, I personally don't. I know that Community does integrate some, but I'm not part of that. I'm more part of the after the event happens, helping folks kind of put their lives back together while they're on the rehab unit.
So when you're doing with the prevention side of your job, what sort of focus do you have there?
Well, one of the things that I do as an occupational therapist is I run a program statewide that's called Think First, Heads Up Missoula. And we go out into local schools pretty much all over western Montana, and we talk in classroom assemblies to kids and try to convince them that they only get one brain, they only get one spinal cord, they need to protect it. So we just give them some common sense information about how they can lead a full life, still have fun, but not get hurt.
Think First, Heads Up. That sounds like a great group that would organize to try to help city council or something. So when you go into the classrooms, what do you tell all these kids?
Well, it's a pretty interesting program. We've got a couple of videos that we show. We have some props. We have a spine and a brain. We review anatomy, and we just give them little-known facts about how their body works and how important it is to maintain their spinal cord and their brain.
Let me ask you this:
Sure.
do the boys and girls ever ask, "Is my brain better than his brain, or bigger, or smarter, or what?"
Believe it or not, we have had that question before, and it usually becomes a gender thing. The girls and the boys, accuse each other of being the more stupid sex.
Oh, well, it sounds like a presidential, debate
Yeah.
these days. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a fun program, though. We do our best to educate and not scare, because the research shows that the more information you can present, to pretty much kids from the 6th grade on, the better.
So you said you bring a brain and a spinal cord?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Models.
Okay,
Models, yeah.
plastic. All right, okay.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, or Jell-O.
Have you Jell-O's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
Do they get to eat the brain after?
Anyway, so have you seen the movie Concussion?
Yes.
What did you think of that?
I thought it was very, very well done. Very well done.
Was it fairly accurate when
It
comes to
was.
the injuries that these?
It was.
The professional football, because I was fascinated because I love football. Okay, I've never played it, but I actually love it. And so when he said, if you take all of the shocks that young man's brain went through from pee-wee football all the way up to playing in the pros for 17 years, we're talking potentially millions of tiny or large shocks to the
Yes.
brain
Mm-hmm.
that they all said, "Oh, shake it off, concussion. How many fingers? Get back in the game.
Your brain will heal.
Yeah. Everything will be fine. Relax."
Yeah.
But then, for those who don't know the plot of the story, some very famous football players began having all sorts of terrible problems once they left the NFL. Suicide, homicide, all sorts of things happen. And this doctor was played by Will Smith, who should have gotten an Oscar nomination, in my opinion.
I agree.
Anyway, did some research, some groundbreaking, because he's a pathologist, and did some groundbreaking research on the brains of these athletes.
And he was not well received by the NFL
Yeah,
initially.
because and one of the arguments was, hey, you're going up against a corporation that owns a day of the week, the NFL.
Yeah.
So how is that going now, especially when you go into schools? This is really fascinating. When you have a brain and a spinal cord, do you talk about football? Do you talk about soccer? Do you talk about these contact sports?
We talk about all contact sports, all activities, all risk-taking behaviors, and then just normal athletics. And we try to give them as much information as possible about how they can protect their body. We have recommended that everybody see Concussion. There are a lot of other videos out there that are just as educational as well. So we deal a lot with that, especially with the high schoolers. And high schoolers in particular, high school men, feel pretty invincible. So they're a pretty hard sell. We also focus in that program on driving.
Oh,
because that's a big one.
So I've got an 8-year-old daughter, 5-year-old son, and 2-year-old son. Since you deal with this kind of risk management with teenagers and youth, what is the biggest risk for my kids growing up, do you think?
Well, right now, the number one killer of kids under the age of 20 is traumatic brain injury, whether it's from a skateboard, a bicycle, an accident, a trampoline. There are a lot of activities that they can be involved in.
Horseback riding?
Horseback riding, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I have a relative who's involved in medical, and he says horseback riding is the worst because not only are you falling from a high distance, you're going at velocity. So you've got two different aspects of physics going against you when you...
And a horse is just a really large reactor.
Right.
Horses are so reactive. The most dangerous thing that we do, though, every single day is get into a car.
Yeah.
That's absolutely statistically the most dangerous thing that we do.
Wow.
Tell you what, we're up against a break. We also have a caller, so strap on those headphones when we come back from the break. 721-1290 is our number. If you have a question for Rebecca Robertson, we'll be right back. Our number is 721-1290. Stay with us. Hey, welcome back to Health Talk, sponsored by Community Medical Center from day one. Rebecca Robertson joining us here in the studio. You ready for a call?
Yes.
All right, let's get right to it. Mike, you were on Talkback. Hi.
Yeah, I want to talk to her about the brain injuries because I just caught part of this was on the radio or whatever it was on.
Yeah, this is the radio, Mike.
Well, I know, but it might have been on television. I'm getting old and confused, and believe me, I've had enough brain
We didn't
concussions
need
to
a
last me
sample,
lifetime.
Mike.
Okay, but here's the deal. They say all these, and it makes sense to me, all these fancy helmets and going to protect you really does not protect your brain because it's like anything else. It'll keep you from getting a black eye or whatever, but your brain actually is more or less floating in your head. So when your head comes to the street, the brain runs forward or backwards. And they did a study where they somehow or other they inject and put more fluid in the head, so the brain would be cushioned with this fluid. I don't know how it worked. I just caught this, but the concussion part dropped dramatically on the test subjects and the ones that didn't get it, and it only makes sense because that will protect you, but it won't stop your brain from slouching around.
Right.
That's what the biggest problem is. So them fancy helmets look cute, but they're no better than the leather ones they had 50, 60, 100 years ago.
Okay, thanks,
Okay.
Mike. Appreciate the call.
So the caller made a really good point. And we're discovering with the latest research that helmets will prevent an injury to your head, and they can prevent skull fractures. But helmets do not necessarily always prevent the injury to the brain. And the caller was right. The brain is surrounded by cerebral spinal fluid. It's kind of floating up in your skull. On the inside of the skull, there are a lot of harsh little boundaries and jagged bones that your brain tissue can get ripped on. So it's really more the force of the blow to your head and your brain sloshing around inside that causes the actual brain injury. Helmets do help. Helmets help to decrease the injury to your head and the physics of the forces, But the caller was right. Helmets do not necessarily prevent all brain injuries.
We had a couple of researchers here from the University of Montana several months ago who'd done significant research on this.
Yeah.
And I asked them, because I was blown away, quite literally. They were talking about helmets and all that. And the
Yeah.
fact that they're, And so I said, is there a helmet that can protect people from brain injury? And they said basically no.
Yeah. And
like,
and really
Yike.
that was determined probably 8 to 10 years ago. And a lot of the research that I brought with me to share, specifically about car crashes, we're a little slow to catch up with the latest research.
So
but
should
we're
we be wearing
definitely
helmets
getting
in our cars?
I would say not yet, although there's been some times when I've been looking at the research that I've wondered about it, but
Yeah.
probably not yet.
Let's talk about the car crash story, because
Uh-huh.
you were giving me some startling statistics before we started the show this morning about the trend line.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you had seen a dip, and now it's coming back up. Kind of tell us what you were telling me before in the
Sure.
entryway there.
Well, overall, as I said beforehand, the most dangerous activity that you can do any day is to get in your car and drive. And the statistics are showing that with a lot of the prevention talk and education that's been going on from about 2000 to 2011, car crash fatalities nationwide dropped. We were seeing a pretty good decrease. But from 2011 on, now we're seeing an increase again, and we're especially seeing an increase in age groups lower than 20.
Why?
Well, some of that we're thinking possibly is because of cell phone use, which I'd like to discuss a little bit.
Okay.
Some of it possibly was the economy.
Right.
When the economy tanked, teenagers specifically maybe didn't have as much gas money to be driving around. But, when we learn to drive, it's kind of a long and tedious process. We probably all remember what it was like to go through driver's ed. At first, the car's a really big external thing. It reacts in unpredictable ways, and then with time, we learn to master it. So we have to simultaneously learn basic control things, how to switch gears, how to brake, and then we kind of combine all of those specific tasks
Eyes are
into
always moving, right?
sequences.
Right.
Yeah. But once you learn the sequence of stopping, turning, backing up, passing another car, your brain kind of hooks all those sequences together. Our brains are masterful at chunking information, and our brains automatically do it, and it really makes our life easier. So day after day, as we drive, it becomes so normal and so familiar and so automatic that the car almost becomes like a second skin. We get very, very comfortable in our cars. And once we learn those chunks, when we first learn to drive, we can easily anticipate danger and kind of look ahead. So especially for those of us that commute every day, our routines are so familiar that we just go through the chunks without a whole lot of conscious thought. A lot of us drive on autopilot. Driving becomes almost as natural as walking, but just with walking down the street, if something unexpected happens, we've got to be ready to take conscious control again and adapt. So basically, brains kind of deal with driving. We continually shift between our unconscious routines that we've just done day after day, tens of thousands of times as we drive around, and then small moments of awareness. So really the bad news is our brains don't really multitask. We just flip back and forth from task to task. The good news is, though, that if you know that, there are ways to maximize your focus when you're driving.
Okay, so I'm one of these human drones that drives and then just kind of gets in a zone.
Yeah.
And will miss my exits and stuff like that because
Yeah.
I'm just so focused on the whatever I'm listening to usually. So what are what's the trick to get my wife off my back when I'm driving?
So that you don't miss your exit.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
He said prophetically, yeah.
We just did this when we went to Yellowstone, by the way. Missed the exit to Yellowstone. Yeah.
He said.
Yeah. I think maybe this will help a little bit, and we can talk about tricks in a minute, but the latest research is showing that there's absolutely no difference between driving drunk, driving legally intoxicated, driving drowsy. If you haven't had sleep for 24 hours, it's basically the equivalent of having a 1.0 blood alcohol concentration, and no difference with cell phones. And this is the most startling news that I really wanted to share today. It doesn't matter whether you have a handheld, A hands-free cell phone, whenever you voice text, the latest research is showing it's all equal. There's no difference between driving intoxicated, driving drowsy and nodding off, and using your phone.
You mean talking on the phone? Like, the problem with the using the phone thing, which our city council recently found out, is we use our phones in a lot of different ways.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
For example, on the trip to Yellowstone, I did not have my phone GPS turned on to give me the little ding to tell me to turn right in the next 200 yards, right? So I missed my exit. I'm sure that's the problem. But other people, they're holding their phones and texting. Mm-hmm. That seems like a lot more involvement than just passively setting it onto the side or turning on the radio through your phone, right?
Yeah.
So what level of involvement are we talking about with the cell phones?
So unfortunately, we're talking the level of cognitive distraction. And so I'm going to try and summarize about 30 different studies. The National Safety Council, NHTSA, that's the National Highway Transportation Safety Association, AAA, neuroscientists, even the Mythbusters guys on TV. They did 2 segments on this. A lot of the studies, most people think that hands-free devices eliminate 2 obvious risks. One, you're using your hands, okay, so you're looking away from the road, and you're manually using your hands. So those 2 are risky behaviors. But the third type of distraction is the worst, and that's your cognitive distraction. If you are cognitively distracted, you don't realize it. So just to give you an example, if you think about our brain having limited resources, they'll do studies. They'll hook up drivers to functional MRIs to study the blood flow. So anything that you actively listen to, not necessarily just music on the radio, but a conversation that you are actively listening to, it takes blood from the visual part of your brain, your visual cortex, and moves it to other parts of your brain. And if it's a real insistent conversation, your visual area shuts down significantly.
We're gonna take a break. We'll come right back and pick that up, because those of you who are listening right now, just eyes on the road. We'll be right back. Hey, we are back, and I just want to go right back to Rebecca, because we have some very important facts we want to relay. So go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to keep going with some of the results of the latest research.
Right ahead.
Just listening to someone speak on the phone causes a 37% drop in your parietal lobe activity. So this is the part of your brain where spatial skills are managed, like being able to judge distance and speed and where your car is in the lane, what the car ahead of you is doing. But then there's more to it than that. When you're on the phone and driving, when your brain plans to speak, and then when you actually speak, that puts a lot more demand on brain power than just listening, and you become 4 times more distracted. The research shows that talking on a hands-free device and voice texting, it just automatically reduces the amount of visual information that you can process by half, by 50%. So basically decreasing the attention skills of a 20-year-old and making them be more equivalent to an 85-year-old. So I'm summarizing lots of data from a lot of research.
This is no fun.
I know. These were studies that were longitudinal, and they linked data, and they just kept coming up with the same result. So using a cell phone, it can cause inattention blindness. You're driving down the road, you have your eyes ahead, you think you're being safe, you look, but you don't see. Our brain just can't process separate streams of information efficiently. So if the most important function, of course, with your brain is vision when you're driving. So if you're listening and engaged in a phone conversation, something has to give. Our brains are kind of hardwired to pay attention to the conversation, because our brains intuitively know those words are going to disappear. We can't see them. As soon as we hear the words, they're gone. Something has to give, and what gives is the blood fly to your visual cortex. One more summary statistic here. Cell phone users have more crashes than drunk drivers. That just blew my mind to hear that. Again, I'm going to repeat it. Cell phone users, whether it's handheld, whether they're voice texting or hands-free, they have more crashes than drunk drivers. They've studied long-haul truckers. These guys are the pros, right? They did a study of 200. Even when they were doing hands-free voice texting, Even when it looked like their eyes were on the road, for 4 to 6 seconds, they weren't really seeing what was happening in front of them.
Real quickly, we're out of time. How do folks get more information? How do they contact your office?
The best way to contact me would be via email.
Okay.
My email at community is R for Rebecca, R Robertson, ROBERTSON at communitymed.org. It's been a pleasure. This is really important information.
We want to have you back.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks.
So that's going to do it for this edition of Health Talk. I know about you. I'm just going to watch the control board very carefully here because I don't want to get into a wreck.
You weren't sleeping, so you got to really focus now.
All right. So we'll come right back and have talk back. Stay with us.